During the history of the United States, 8 presidents have died in office. Of those 8, 4 were assassinated and 4 died of natural causes. In all 8 cases, the Vice President of the United States took over the office of presidency as part of the United States presidential line of succession. Who is the American president who died in the office? And why did they die? Who is the American president with the shortest position in American history? Watch this video, don't forget to like, comments and subscribe for more interesting videos. On March 26, 1841, William Henry Harrison became ill with a cold. According to the prevailing medical misconception of that time, it was believed that his illness was directly caused by the bad weather at his inauguration. However, Harrison's illness did not arise until more than 3 weeks after the event. The cold worsened, rapidly turning to pneumonia and pleurisy. He sought to rest in the White House, but could not find a quiet room because of the steady crowd of office seekers. His extremely busy social schedule has made any rest time scarce. Harrison's doctors tried cures, applying opium, castor oil, leeches, and Virginia snakeroot. But the treatments only made Harrison worse, and he became delirious. He died 9 days after being ill, on April 4, 1841. He was the first United States president to die in office. Harrison's funeral took place in the Wesley Chapel in Cincinnati, Ohio, on April 7, 1841. His original interment was in the public vault of the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. He was later buried in North Bend, Ohio. The William Henry Harrison Tomb State Memorial was erected in his honor. The cause of Zachary Taylor's death has not been fully established. On July 4, 1850, Taylor was known to have consumed copious amounts of ice water, cold milk, green apples, and cherries after attending holiday celebrations and the laying of the cornerstone of the Washington Monument. That same evening, he became severely ill with an unknown digestive ailment. Doctors used popular treatments of the time. Taylor died in the White House at 10:35 p.m. on July 9, 5 days after becoming ill. Contemporary reports listed the cause of death as bilious diarrhea, or a bilious cholera. He was succeeded by Vice President Millard Fillmore. Taylor was interred in the public vault of the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. from July 13, 1850 to October 25, 1850. It was built in 1835 to hold remains of notables until either the grave site could be prepared or transportation arranged to another city. His body was transported to the Taylor family plot where his parents are buried, on the old Taylor homestead plantation known as Springfield in Louisville, Kentucky. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln took place on Good Friday, on April 14, 1865, as the American Civil War was drawing to a close. The assassination occurred 5 days after the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee, surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln was the first American president to be assassinated. The assassination of Lincoln was planned and carried out by the well-known stage actor John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, vehement in his denunciation of Lincoln, and a strong opponent of the abolition of slavery in the United States. Lincoln was shot once in the back of his head while watching the play Our American Cousin with his wife Mary Todd Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. at around 10:15 p.m. on the night of April 14, 1865. An Army surgeon who happened to be at Ford's, Dr. Charles Leal, assessed Lincoln's wound as mortal. The unconscious president was then carried across the street from the theater to the Peterson House, where he remained in a coma for 9 hours before dying the following morning at 7:22 a.m. on April 15. The assassination of James A. Garfield took place in Washington, D.C. on July 2, 1881. Garfield was shot by Charles J. Gutierrez at 9:30 a.m., less than 4 months into Garfield's term as the 20th President of the United States. Garfield died 11 weeks later on September 19, 1881. His vice president, Chester A. Arthur, succeeded Garfield as president. Garfield also lived the longest after the shooting, compared to other presidents. Garfield was scheduled to leave Washington on July 2, 1881 for his summer vacation. On that day, Gutierrez lay in wait for the president at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, on the southwest corner of present-day 6th Street and Constitution Avenue, NW, Washington, D.C. William McKinley was assassinated on September 6, 1901, inside the Temple of Music on the grounds of the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley was shaking hands with the public when he was shot by Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist. The president died 8 days later on September 14 from gangrene caused by the bullet wounds. McKinley initially appeared to be recovering, but took a turn for the worse on September 13 as his wounds became gangrenous, and died early the next morning. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt succeeded him. After McKinley's murder, for which Czolgosz was put to death in the electric chair, the United States Congress passed legislation to officially charge the Secret Service with the responsibility for protecting the president. Warren G. Harding died from a sudden heart attack in his hotel suite while visiting San Francisco at around 7:35 p.m. on August 2, 1923. His death quickly led to theories that he had been poisoned or committed suicide. Rumors of poisoning were fueled, in part, by a book called The Strange Death of President Harding, in which the author, convicted criminal, former Ohio gang member, and Detective Gaston Means, hired by Mrs. Harding to investigate Warren Harding and his mistress, suggested that Mrs. Harding had poisoned her husband after learning of his infidelity. Mrs. Harding's refusal to allow an autopsy on President Harding only added to the speculation. According to the physicians attending Harding, however, the symptoms in the days prior to his death all pointed to congestive heart failure. Harding's biographer, Samuel H. Adams, concluded that Warren G. Harding died a natural death which, in any case, could not have been long postponed. On March 29, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt went to the Little White House at Warm Springs, Georgia, to rest before his anticipated appearance at the founding conference of the United Nations. On the afternoon of April 12, Roosevelt said, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head." He then slumped forward in his chair, unconscious, and was carried into his bedroom. The president's attending cardiologist, Dr. Howard Bruin, diagnosed a massive cerebral hemorrhage, stroke. At 3:35 p.m. that day, Roosevelt died without regaining consciousness. As Alan Drury later said, "So ended an era, and so began another." After Roosevelt's death, an editorial by the New York Times declared, "Men will thank God on their knees 100 years from now that Franklin D. Roosevelt was in the White House." John F. Kennedy was assassinated at 12:30 p.m. on Friday, November 22, 1963, in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was fatally shot while traveling with his wife Jacqueline, Texas Governor John Connally, and the latter's wife Nellie, in a presidential motorcade. The 10-month investigation by the Warren Commission of 1963-1964 concluded that President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald and that Oswald had acted entirely alone. Most current John F. Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories put forth a criminal conspiracy involving parties as varied as the CIA, the Mafia, anti-Castro Cuban exile groups, the military-industrial complex, sitting Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban President Fidel Castro, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, the KGB, or some combination of those entities.